All right.
All right.
Good to be here. Nice to see everyone. Delighted to be here today to interview Job and all about building a hyper-growth business with no BS or bureaucracy, which is actually very apt here because I recall the first time I met Job, which was back in 2019, and he was pitching us for the pre-seed round. I think he might have even still been at GitLab or just left GitLab. And I came onto the call, which was Zoom, because he was fully remote from day one, even before it was cool. And he just said, I'm going to build a payroll business, international payroll, payroll everywhere, so anyone, anywhere in the world can build payroll. And that was it. Can do payroll. And there was no slideshow. There was nothing else. There was absolutely no BS. That was the pitch. And sure enough, today, he has built a payroll business, which means that 99.9% of the world's population can be hired and paid through remote platforms. So it's been a pretty incredible journey. I think you're about 2,000 people now, and yeah, pretty unbelievable operations building payroll, contractor payments, benefits, compliance, and all of these different markets around the world. So there's a ton of complexity in the business. But Job manages to abstract that all away and have a really incredible BS-free culture. So Job, maybe to start off, we'll do a little warm-up, quick fire. Can you tell us what makes your, I think I can say this, bullshit detector go off?
Yeah, I think, Hannah, you started with a really good one, which is that I don't like abbreviations, so I just say bullshit, because if people use a lot of abbreviations, I don't know what they're talking about. Another one is committees. The moment somebody says, I'm going to start a committee, I'm like, why? Do you want to not get shit done? And then slideshows. The intro already said it. Like, I think that if you spend your time creating a slide deck, you should really just give up. Like, spend the time on something more valuable. Just write shit down, share it with people. You don't have to create all these visuals with it. Yeah.
Great. And tell us about a time, be vulnerable here, when you have found yourself contributing to the bullshit.
Yeah, it happens all the time, because somebody asks you, oh, do you want to join this meeting or have this meeting, and it's really, really important. And then I find myself in a meeting where I don't necessarily have anything to contribute, where maybe that meeting shouldn't have happened in the first place, or just being in a place that is not really helpful to anybody, right? And I think it's a constant fight. And I think as companies get bigger, you are constantly being asked to do things that don't really contribute to your goals as a company. And so it's really hard to actually fully avoid it. And I find myself all the time in situations. But I get really annoyed. And it's very funny because I start to get restless in my seat. And, we are all on the Zoom. And then my co-founder sends me a message, Job, sit still. I know you're anxious to kill this meeting, but be respectful. So yeah, it happens all the time.
Okay, all right. I'll note that next time we're on a call together if you start being restless.
Yeah, I start touching my hair.
Time to end the Zoom call.
Yeah.
And final quick fire question. What advice were you given as you've been scaling remote that turned out to be bullshit? And hopefully that is not advice that I've given you.
No, it's that you have to delegate everything. There's a point where you have to start delegating things that are important to you, right? There's this saying, and I'm really bad at saying about giving away your toys or something. And I don't think that's true. I think the things that you care about, you should continue to care about, and you should be hands-on, no matter who you are in the organization. And so if I care particularly about a particular part of the product, for example, just letting other people decide, even though they might not do what I want to do, is actually not a good advice, because you're going to get really unhappy as a founder, and usually your intuition is right, besides the fact that your incentives and your care about the company is always greater as a founder than anybody else. So I think that's one of the biggest ones that, delegating things that you care about, you should just not do. You should have people working with you on it. You cannot do it all by yourself, but if you care about something, continue to care about it.
You're right. You do live by that, right? We have no Chief Product Officer at Remote. He's sitting right here.
Admittedly, we had one, and it didn't last very long.
Okay, and then as you set out building Remote over the past 5 years, what did you do in the very early days as you were building the company to really set it up to be this sort of lean, no bureaucracy culture?
Yeah, I think it's funny because we talk about no bureaucracy, right? That we're a fully remote company, and so we actually do write down a lot of stuff. And so I try to always strike this balance between being highly pragmatic, but also making sure we document enough. And so in the beginning, one of the things that we said, we want to be incredibly transparent, right? And it's a really great value to have as an organization because it forces you to be uncomfortable, to share often. And if you share very openly, it avoids a lot of duplicative work, right? One of my biggest pet peeves is meetings that exist only to share information, right? It's a fucking waste of time. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. If you're in a meeting and the only goal of that meeting is to just say to people, this is the information you need to know, you might as well not have it. You can send people a video or a document. And so being really transparent, that was one of the ways that really helped in the beginning, and it continues to work really, really well. And it also helped a lot to inform our customers of like, oh, we want to be not just internally transparent, but also externally transparent, so that if you buy a product of ours, you know how much you're going to pay. You're not going to be surprised at all sorts of hidden fees later on when you're using the product.
And going back to something we were talking about earlier, which is, Remote started out as this employer of record platform, and then you built out contractor payments and benefits and compliance, and now you've built out payroll in multiple countries all around the globe. And that's a really hard thing to build. Yeah. And I know you've often had pressure from the board, which is like, just do it faster, do it faster. And can you share when you decide to take the shortcuts versus do the really hard thing and go down the hard road?
Yeah, I think my philosophy is very simple, which is that if you want to build a product and you want it to be truly great, not just good, but truly great, you have to own as much of it as possible. Because if a customer comes to you and says, oh, it doesn't work, you should be able to fix it, right? And so what we always said is anything that's fundamental to us, we cannot take any shortcuts. So we have to do the hard route, the route that investors are not very happy about, which is we're first going to set up everything, and it's going to take 4 years to build all this infrastructure, and then maybe we're going to make some money. But I promise it's going to be good. So those are the cases where we don't take a shortcut. I think you do have to take a shortcut for basically everything else, right? You have to be really comfortable doing temporary things and being highly pragmatic for just making it work, right? And so even though in the very beginning we owned the infrastructure and we did everything ourselves, the way we did it was kind of shitty, right? That was the shortcut we had to take because we couldn't set up this whole fancy system just to make sure we could serve customers because they were all knocking at our door. And so, and then over time we were able to fix that, and now it's all perfect.
It is. And what is the secret to having been a really lean team, but also scaled super quickly in a super complex market? Can you give any tips on the tools or the processes that you've built internally or that you run internally to sort of make this well-oiled machine run?
Yeah, I think the real answer is just having intense anxiety all the time about making this work. Every day I worry that we're hiring too many people and that the organization is slowing down. I think that's the real answer. And then there's other things you could do, which is we make sure that people are really empowered, that they can take decisions and they can make mistakes, right? Anything that's not a trapdoor decision, so a decision that you cannot undo. Any other decision should be taken in a moment. So you cannot wait for a meeting, you cannot wait for consensus, you cannot ask people if they agree with you. If you're the owner of the decision, you should take it. I think that was really, really important. And then over time, and especially now, we built all sorts of interesting tools, like AI tools that allow us to essentially say, well, this team is going to do 10 times as much volume in whatever it is that they do over the next year, but we're going to keep the headcount flat, so the team is not going to grow. And that puts a lot of pressure on the team, not just to find solutions, but also to actually implement them. Because it can be very easy if you have a budget to max out the budget, and if you have headcount, to just add headcount as you scale. But the moment you're faced with hard constraints, it really forces people to be more creative.
So on the AI side, because it wouldn't be a tech talk in 2024 without the mention of AI tools, what are you using internally that's helping to sort of streamline the operations?
I mean, if the OpenAI bills tell me anything, it should be everything. But for our business, we deal with the most boring shit in the world, right? Which is labor laws and payroll laws and contracts, and that in many, many different languages. And so for us, the work where you used to need a small army of people to translate things, to interpret things, now we just have a magical little AI doing that for us. And so we use it in everything. We use it in our product extensively. So one of the cool things we did recently is that, maybe it's not cool for most people, but it's cool for us, which is that if you want to offboard somebody, so somebody leaving your company voluntarily or not, we actually have an AI informing you, what are the risks? What can you do? What should you do? What should you think about? How should you strategize about this? What should you think? It's really, really cool. And it doesn't just like take it from like a support document. It takes the whole context of the person, the situation of your company into account. But in all other ways, like we use it wherever we can. And I think adoption will only grow as we see like more tools effectively using it. I think remote is particularly well place to adopt AI because we do so much with documentation and stuff. But I think over time it's going to seep into every part of the company. And of course, every single engineer in our company either uses Copilot or Cursor or Replit. Like we use them all nowadays.
And have you found that the efficiency of the engineering team has dramatically increased since they've been using these tools?
I'm not sure. I think measuring engineering efficiency is something that's quite of an interesting discussion. So I think most would say that yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you foster this culture of innovation internally so that if someone has an idea of some AI-powered tool that they could buy or they could build to improve the efficiency of the company, they can do that?
Honestly, it's very difficult in a large company, right? And I think you have to push really hard. I think the larger your company gets, the more people become conservative and like want to like slow things down and first evaluate them. So I think it helps to push a lot as a founder, as an executive, on like take risks. Like a company's not going to burn if your little AI tool doesn't work perfectly. So I think that is one of the ways to do it. And then just making sure that you're generous with the budget, right? Like I think my worst fear is that someone says to me, oh, we couldn't do this AI thing because we exceeded our OpenAI quota and we didn't want to raise it. Like that would be really bad.
Not too generous. Please, Job.
No, it's all going to pay off, Anna. It's like, oh, amazing ROI.
Good. And you know, given that you are a fully remote company, which I do always find unbelievable, like 2,000 people, not a single office around the world. Yeah. It's sort of an orthodox remote culture. How do you then, that means there has to be lots of documentation by nature so that everyone understands what's going on. So how do you square that with being like, no bureaucracy, but everything that happens has to be documented?
Yeah, the reality is that you already do this as a company for a large part, right? So if you work in some project management suite, everything is documented and it's there. You don't have to write stuff down anywhere else. If you use Slack, your conversations are there. You can record meetings very easily now, so that is covered. And so what remains is just like documentation for like how do you run your company. In our case, how do you deal with like payroll in a particular country? It needs to be written down anyway, right? And so again, like my approach has always been, at GitLab we had a very dogmatic approach where we said everything needs to be first documented. And at Remote we took a more of a pragmatic approach, which aligns more with the personalities of me and the CEO of GitLab, on like, well, you should write down, but first get shit done. And I think that sort of has been the answer. And then Remote has sort of been saved by AI in a lot of ways in that, we used to spend a lot of time thinking about how do we structure information. That was a really, really difficult thing. And we still have somebody dedicated at Remote to this, like organizing our documentation. But for the most part, it's no longer a question of having to search through it because you have an AI that can just answer based on the contents.
Got it. And how do you interview and screen for people that work in that very particular culture, who are going to be able to thrive in a remote culture, in a sort of ambiguous environment where it's like a culture of innovation, but you're also working, it's payroll, right? Yeah. It's like very regulated, and you've got to get everything right, and it's got to be perfect. So what kind of people do you hire for, and how do you kind of tease them out? Yeah,
so we basically summarize what we believe makes for a good remote employee, like Remote, my company, it's not necessarily in other companies, and that's intensity. People are very intense about what they do. They care deeply about what they do. They're very focused. They can break through walls. They're not afraid to, ruffle some feathers for the sake of keeping peace. Those people, not assholes. We don't want assholes. So it's like balancing between the two. But I think that summarizes it.
But you did have one of the early values was like be nice or something, right?
No, it was not be nice. So when we started the company, our values were kindness and then a bunch of others. And then we ended up swapping out kindness because it got misinterpreted as being nice. And so the thing that happened, which is the thing we exactly didn't want to, was that people were being really, really nice to each other. So they were not giving each other direct feedback. And not giving each other feedback, yeah, that's a disaster for a company because you're not going to get better. So yeah, we took out kindness, we replaced it with care, which is sort of the same thing, but not the same thing. Okay. And we added intensity.
All right. And how do you translate that internal culture, which is transparency, no bullshit, everyone sort of intense and focused on the mission externally to your customers? Like, how have you managed to also create this sort of transparent and no bullshit culture externally too?
Yeah, I think transparency I spoke about, which is very helpful to customers. If you're very transparent about this is what you're going to get, this is how much it's going to cost, there's going to be no surprises, right? But all the other things, to our customers, we do the most important thing, right? Because on one side, we have employers, they need to pay our employees. But more importantly, we are responsible for the primary income of most of the people that we pay, if not all of them. And so that means that these are people waiting to get their salary to be able to pay their rent, to feed their kids, to, I don't know, feed their dog. And so if we fuck up, it's an actual disaster. And so we want to be incredibly intense about how we deal with these kind of situations, and incredibly intentional, incredibly transparent about what we believe, what we think is the right thing. One thing that I didn't anticipate in our business would be so incredibly important was, for example, taxation. So we deal a lot with like tax compliance and whatnot, and I see here that we cannot make mistakes, because the mistakes in taxation, they come back like years later. And so we have to, one, be incredibly knowledgeable and be incredibly right, essentially 100% of the time. And so we have to be able to show this to our customers, that like we know the law. We probably know it better than most other people on the planet.
Great. I think we have time for a Q&A, I hope. But maybe we can finish off with a final piece of advice for the founders and the operators in the room. Like, what is your tip for avoiding bureaucracy?
Yeah, I think it's just not letting people convince you that it's necessary. You have to just kill it when you see it. If you see somebody, this is one thing. If somebody comes to me and says, let's have a meeting about something, and it's something important, I say, okay, sure, we can have a meeting about it. And they've prepared a whole slideshow, I immediately tell them. I tell them in a moment, I'm sorry, but you've wasted your time. I don't want you to spend time preparing to present to the CEO or anybody else, because you could do shit in that time. And so I think by setting an example like that, I think it's really, really important. And it's not to say that you shouldn't be prepared for meetings. You should be prepared. It's not to say that you shouldn't write stuff down. You should write stuff down. But like, if you spend time on looks over substance, that's really, really bad. And you should just like be really clear with everybody from the get-go, which is why everybody at Remote continues to joke, oh, Job, I made a slideshow, haha, you don't like it. And I say, no, I don't like it. And this is maybe an exception, but it is the exception. I don't want you to do this kind of stuff, because it's a waste of time. I think it's generally an incredible waste of time. And so and then just delete all your meetings. Like, just restart. Just say, am I attending any meetings in which I am not contributing? Okay, then don't do those. Right? And that's it. Like, it saves you like 50% of, I mean, if you're working in consultancy, you can quit your job because there's nothing more to do. But for other companies, it saves you like 90% of your time. But
sorry, just one more question. One-on-ones, you do them or you don't do them?
Yeah, I do them.
Okay. Sounds like a meeting.
Yeah, what I found is like, I have reports, like my CFO, for example, he's like me, also Dutch guy. And it's like, yeah, we can have a one-on-one, or we can just not. Like, it's fine. And then I have people that really want to have the time together. You still want to bond, and some people want you to talk to them face to face. And so it really depends on the person. I think my general advice to like founders is just, you have to do whatever is necessary to make your company work, right? Whatever is necessary. So if it means doing really boring meetings that you don't feel like, you do those. But yeah, the one-on-ones, but some of my reports I barely ever do one-on-ones, so we just do ad hoc whenever we feel like it,
Yeah, there is a school of thought that if you need to do one-on-ones, there's a problem, because if someone wants to talk to you about something, they should be able to talk to you about that whenever that topic comes up. But
yeah, and it's sort of what we do, because I think we're so busy and so focused that we end up like, we do one-on-ones, but not super recurring.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and also, there's something wrong. There's always something wrong in a company, right? Like, so you're probably gonna have to have a lot of one-on-ones.
Yeah, cool, great, all right. I think we're allowed to do a Q&A.
Yeah, happy to.
Let's just do it. We're on stage. Our rules. Does anyone have any questions for Job?
We can't see you though.
It's quite dark in here. Yeah. I can see a hand. I think it's you. Yeah. So just you. Yeah. I think just shout. Maybe introduce yourself so Job has the context of who you are, and then shout.
My name is Juhani, and I'm from Finland, and I work for a company called Bismarck.
flying mic.
So my question to you would be that you have built a service that services across the different geographies and jurisdictions. And from a similar environment, would we have found as a challenge to find the right trade-off, having like a just one size fits for all company culture and processes and everything, which is of course scalable, but that doesn't serve the local conditions. On the other end, you could build a totally different approach in the different jurisdictions and geographies and so on, but that doesn't scale. So what advice would you give us?
I mean, in terms of culture, right, you have to build one company. I wouldn't do it differently by geography. And what I found is that I often get a question from people like, oh, different people, different cultures. I found that that's not really a thing if you're really clear about your company culture, right? And so remote, my company it doesn't have a nationality. And so we're not an American company, we're not an anything company, because the team is so incredibly diverse that like we're just whatever the company culture is. And then it sort of doesn't matter where people are. But I mean, I think it's a really bad idea to like run your company differently in different markets, because then you're basically segmenting and siloing those teams and those parts of your company. And I wouldn't do that. You want to keep it as much as possible a single team. And we have 2,000 employees and we're doing okay as a single team. So I would recommend you to do the same.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hey, Melissa here from Dig Ventures. We're an early stage VC. Can you share some learnings around setting up good feedback processes?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think you need to create like so the thing I do with all my reports is I tell how I give feedback and what I'm used to, and I think making that a standard is a pretty good idea, which is give negative feedback, positive as well, but especially negative feedback right away in private. And if you never get any feedback, you should ask for it. If you just write that down and that becomes standard and everybody follows that, that's like you're so far ahead, you're far above like 50% of all companies. I know that I am really bad at giving positive feedback because I'm like, if it's positive, keep going, I won't say anything. If it's negative, I'll let you know yesterday. And so I always tell people up front, I'm like, well, I'm probably not going to give you positive feedback, but if you really want it, you should tell me, or you should ask me, hey, do you have anything to say? I recently hired somebody new, and the person was like, Joop, you're not telling me how I'm doing. I said, because you're doing a good job. So I think that's a really good start. And the other thing is you should use remote, because we're launching a tool for that pretty soon. So.
Thanks.
I think we have time for like one more question. But we can't see the room, so you have to like really wave.
I think there's one over there.
Hi, Rolly Walter from Appraised, an employee performance management system. And I'm just wondering why you think people start committees, and what is it in people that makes them want to have a meeting?
It's very scary to take decisions. If you take a decision, it means that you will be held accountable for that. And you might want to be more sure about it. Maybe you're not sure of yourself. Maybe you're not sure of your decision. And so it's much easier to be like, oh, let's start a fucking committee, and it's not my decision anymore. And that might not be the thinking process. It might just be like, oh, it's good to get a lot of input from other people. And and rationally, you can easily defend it. I'm like, oh, it's probably a good idea if we get together and we put our brains together and come together to a solution. It all sounds very logical, so it's really easy to defend building a committee and setting one up. In reality, what you're doing is you're slowing everything down, but it's not logically what you come to the moment you start to think, oh, maybe I need more inputs. And so it's just if having that understanding up front of like, oh, adding layers of meetings and other bullshit is going to slow me down significantly, therefore I should not do it, is really helpful. And the other one is like having simple rules, like, oh, if it's not a trapdoor decision, you should take the decision in a moment, because even if you're wrong, the time spent recovering from the wrong decision is probably less than the time spent looking for consensus. And it feels really counterintuitive, because a lot of people are going to make a lot of stupid decisions, but it's still on net you're going to be positive, right? But yeah, why do people start committees? I guess they're bored and they don't have anything better to do. Yeah, that's probably the answer. Yeah.
All right. On that note, I think we need to wrap up.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Job.